everybody. Welcome back to the Underwater Photography Show. As always, I'm Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And today we have one that I know a lot of people have been clamoring for because I've seen how many people are asking Alex about it. I've gotten some questions about it and I don't even have one. So today we're going to talk about the new Sony GM 100mm macro, which Alex just had the pleasure of taking to Lembeh with him. So we're going
Well, I
to go
have
through a
to
whole
correct you
slideshow.
there because I didn't take it with me. It arrived with some of my workshop guests after I was already there. And it wasn't even mine. It was actually belonged to my friend Nick, the lens. And then once we knew the lens was en route, Nauticam hurriedly were able to send the port to Singapore for some other people in the workshop group to pick up in Singapore on the way through. So yeah, this was very much skin of the teeth reviewing. But yeah, really excited to have had the chance to shoot it. I shot it extensively during the trip. I'll put some video up of me shooting it that your friend Lawrence filmed for us, so contributing to the show. And yeah, it was I shot well over 3,000 pictures with it. Used it on about a third of my dives during the trip. I shot about 10,000 pictures in total, so it's kind of about a third of the dives. And I really, really like the lens. I think, the headline things for me are it's the best macro lens that I've shot on Sony. And I would go out as far as saying I think it's the best macro lens I've shot. I would say its competition is the Canon RF 100. Very similar lens in terms of specifications in many ways. I kind of would probably like to shoot the two of them back to back to really make a call over which one is actually ahead. The reason I'm going with the Sony as my sweeping generalization as being the best is its ability to take the teleconverter, which is the thing about that lens that probably is most exciting for me, because it instantly gives access to another focal length, if not two, if you buy two teleconverters for it. And I think that makes it really exciting. That said, I think the other really important opening remark about this lens is, yes, it's the best macro lens out there, but it's better than the others by a small amount. It's a small gain in lots of categories. So it's not a lens that you put on your camera and you go, oh my God, what have I been doing for 20 years? This is a whole new world. You put it on your camera and you go, well, it's just like any other macro lens. And then you look at the pictures and they're a little bit better in this area, a little bit better in that area, a little bit better in that area. You enjoy the fact it doesn't just max out at 1:1 magnification. It goes to 1:1.4, and that gives you that extra bit of power. And then when you start adding teleconverters and the way it performs as teleconverters, you're like, yes, I see where this all is. But to our viewers, I think the one thing I would say is this lens comes with a hefty price tag. And if you pay that price tag and go into it, I think your expectations are quite high over what this is going to give you over everything else there. And I think the gains are not maybe as big as the expenditure is going to feel for a lot of people. And so, it's not an open and shut case. Everyone should buy one. If you want the best and money is no object, of course you're going to buy one. But money is an object, and I think you need to factor that in.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what we said in a previous episode. So if anybody hasn't watched that, go ahead and watch that one, where we talked about, we hadn't used, nobody had used it at that point, and we were kind of conjecturing whether or not it would be a significant increase or if it would be kind of just small increases across the board, and whether or not the expense for most people justified that. But with that said, obviously, I'm interested to hear what you thought of it. And I know you have some pictures and things to show us, and I have some questions to ask you. And the two biggest headlines for this lens, besides the teleconverters, which we'll get into, are the image quality, which is of the utmost importance to me. And then I know a lot of people are interested in how the autofocus performed, because macro lenses in general are known for being quite slow, even on modern cameras, especially in low light situations. So the GM lenses from Sony are typically a step above the rest in all regards, including that one. So I think we'll talk about the image quality and autofocus first.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just start off by showing you, a few behind the scenes shots. This is the lens finally catching me up in Lembeh, and then trying the different ports with it. So first of all, I did try the existing Nauticam port for the 90mm, and the 100mm lens is about 16 to 18 millimeters longer than the 90mm Sony lens. But actually, the molding inside the Nauticam 90mm port is very specific to the 90mm lens. And actually, when you try and put that port on the 100mm, it won't push up against right up against the glass of the lens. And instead of needing something like a 18, 19mm port extension to make it fit, it needs a much bigger one. So my advice would be, this is kind of specific to Nauticam users, is if you're getting this lens and you're spending the money on the lens, you're better off spending the money on the dedicated port for it as well, because basically the flat port you probably already have isn't going to fit on it, and that's kind of specific to Nauticam really. But if this is going to become your main lens, it makes sense to do it that way. And this is now the dedicated lens. Nauticam managed to get it to me. I was very impressed because it was basically, we found out this lens was coming on a Saturday, and the people were flying out of Singapore on a Monday, and they managed to get the port from Saturday afternoon. They got it delivered to Singapore on Monday morning and got it to my guys at the airport Monday lunchtime. And so we were able to have the port there, which was, so big thank you to Nauticam for making that possible. And ironically, the lens was my friend Nick's, and we both ordered them at the same time in the UK, but from different camera shops. And then he rang his camera shop up and told them that he was coming to Lembeh to do a workshop with me, to help me run the workshop with me. And that got his lens prioritized, and he got his lens in time. And I still haven't got mine yet, but that's fine. I don't need. I'm not going to be shooting underwater properly again now till January. So yeah, this is the port. It's a bit longer. And then on the right hand side, you can see it with the teleconverter added. You can see there's a small port extension. I was using a 20mm port extension for the port with the teleconverter, the 1.4 teleconverter. Nauticam recommend a 30mm, but that's because their 20mm one isn't officially on sale. So I don't know whether they'll consider putting that product on sale or not. But I was using a 20mm one, which I've had for many years, because we actually were using it when testing port extensions for the FCP when that was a prototype. So that's why I had this old port extension, which was very, very useful on this, because 20mm was perfect for the teleconverter. But I think 30mm still works fine. Right. The only other thing I wanted to point out in this picture was on the left-hand side, there's a yellow ring around the lens. And loads of people asked me what this was. And on the Sony 90mm, I've always used an O-ring on the lens, because it's got, the focus area's got this kind of clutch, you push it forward to have it in autofocus, you put it back to have it on manual focus. And if you knock that going into the housing, you can jump in the water with your lens on manual focus and you can't do anything about it. So I've always used an old O-ring around the lens to stop that clutch moving backwards and forwards. But because I've been using the Tamron 90 all year, no one's really seen any pictures of my Sony 90mm, because I normally share pictures of the housing, not the lenses. So actually, when I put these pictures up, everyone's like, "Oh, what's that yellow ring for?" And everyone's like, "Oh, that's the best tip ever." So there, yeah, it's a useful tip for everyone to know about that.
If only I had known that tip in Lembeh. The only time I've been to Lembeh back in 2018 was the first time I'd used that 90mm, and I didn't know it had the push-pull macro.
Yeah,
and I ruined the first whole 4 days, 4 dives of the very first day, struggling to figure out why the camera wouldn't focus, and it was locked to focus like that far away from the end of the lens.
Luckily there's lots of things you can get that close to in Lembeh and shoot.
There is indeed, although I did miss 2 bright yellow hairy frogfish, which I've never seen again, so I'm still a bit salty about that, but someday I'll get over it.
On this topic, which is not what we want to review about, and please stick with us, I'm going to show you some pictures in a minute. The 100mm lens also has a manual focus autofocus switch on the side.
Okay.
And so despite having my O-ring in the clutch bit, I did manage to knock the switch one time putting it in the housing. But luckily I was able to fix that before I went. That got picked up with my test shot. But it did leave me scratching my head for a second, because I'm like, but I've got the O-ring in there. I can't knock it onto manual focus. And then there's also a switch on the side of the lens. So when I get my version of the lens, that switch is going to be taped up so it can't get knocked accidentally. Right, well, I'm going to get on to your question, which was actually you asked about, which is about focusing and image quality. Because it's a macro lens, I think it is quicker than the 90mm, but not by very much. And I think that's ultimately the fact that all macro lenses have to rack, quite a lot of lens movement in order to get the magnification, moving the elements within the lens to get the focusing. And so all macro lenses aren't the fastest focusing lenses. I thought this is fast, but what this lens really impressed me with is tracking. Its ability to track and to focus on things. I was photographing, this is a fairy wrasse, but I was photographing fairy wrasse and a flasher wrasse on this dive. And there was a bit on the viewfinder when the wrasse was going like this, like literally that fast around the frame, and the square was following it around. I was just like, and I think you probably could have recorded it if I realized, but I was laughing to myself how well it was tracking the subjects. And it was more how well it focused on difficult subjects, not the speed of acquiring focus, but I don't know whether it's just the sharpness of the lens that helps the autofocus, but the autofocus is more impressive in its precision and its tracking than its speed gains over the others. And I'll just show a video of some anemone fish that I shot on the very first dive with it. And I chose the spine cheek anemone fish because they, particularly the smaller females, the pretty ones, they always move. They're always just wiggling backwards and forwards like this when you go up to the anemone. They kind of display in front of the anemone, trying to make you go away. And as a result, it's quite hard to keep them in focus. And just the video I've got running up on the screen now is just scrolling through my pictures in Lightroom. And you can see, okay, the composition isn't always right, but the focus is invariably very good in all this series. And if I zoom in on them as well, you can see in detail how that is on the video. But yeah, ultimately, that's what impressed me most with the focusing. Wasn't the speed gain, but the precision and its ability to focus on challenging subject. This is a small puffer fish that underwater, they look almost completely jet black. And at depth, they're just this little black, about the size of a dice. So very small, little, and they're always moving around like this. And it's very easy with these. The autofocus really hates their eye because their eye is so dark. This has obviously got flash on it. But when you haven't got flash on it, the eye just blends into the body and the autofocus just, grabs onto the yellow spots or that sort of thing. It's really hard to make it focus where you want it to. And I was really impressed with how it focused on these. And you can see it really nailed the focus on the front of this. Often when you shoot them, the focus tends to jump to the edge of the animal rather than staying on the front of it where you want the focus to be. It will go to the edge of the animal where there's the most contrast. And yeah, I was really, really impressed with the autofocus with this subject. And then, yeah, just any time you were dealing with moving subjects, it was, whether it's an anemone fish darting in and out of an anemone, all those things, it was, yeah, it really did a really nice job with. I shot the lens on black water, and I'll talk about that in a bit, but I was impressed with its ability to nail focus on black water. I think it's not necessarily the go-to lens for Sony on black water, but if it was your only macro lens on the trip, I shot both my black water dives with it, and I was very happy with it. I can zoom in again. You can see this is a juvenile or baby coconut octopus or veined octopus, and you can see it. It just nails the focus on this guy. It hasn't just jumped to the torch. It's really nailed the focus on the subject, which is really pleasing. And then, classic macro subjects that you get in Lembeh, like pygmy seahorses. I'll zoom in on the one on the left on the next picture. It's just easy peasy. It just, this is what it sort of eats up for breakfast. So, yeah, very nice to be able to work these subjects and shoot them the way you want to.
Were you changing autofocus modes, or did you kind of leave it in the tracking mode the whole time since it was so good?
So I typically shoot a lot of my macro on tracking. And I usually use tracking small spot or tracking expand spot. For some, I use medium spot. I do occasionally use fixed non-tracking spot if I want real precision, particularly say for like nudibranch rhinophores or something where I don't want it jumping off the subject. I want it to stay on there. And sometimes with moving fish, I will just use auto area or zone because actually the focus is very good at just working out what the face of the fish is and grabbing onto it. So I used all those modes with it, but mainly the tracking autofocus on small point size and occasionally expanded spot size. And then this one, one of the things that really impressed me about the focus as well is it does definitely deliver really good image quality right across the frame and also really good image quality when the aperture is more open. I was very impressed on both counts on that.
Yeah. I kind of jumped the gun earlier, lumping in image quality and autofocus, but obviously image quality is, one of the things the GM series lenses are known for. So I had a couple questions about that. A, the image quality overall. B, the image quality at those wider apertures, which you just sort of addressed. And then, one of the things to remember is the GM Sony has 11 aperture blades, which is at least two more than most other macro lenses on the market, which should help with, out of focus areas and things like that, looking more pleasing to the eye, which is when diving in places like Lembeh or here locally at Blue Heron can be super valuable for cleaning up messy surroundings.
Yeah, and particularly in macro photography, because macro photography is about sharpness, but it's also about separation and blur. And it's unless you've got a completely flat subject, most of your macro pictures are going to be mostly the blurred bits with
Yeah.
just the sharp parts of the subject sharp. So how a macro lens renders out of focus areas is really important. So yeah, I was very impressed. The image quality is excellent. I mean, but all the other macro lenses are still really, really good. It's not that I was like, oh my God, this is a whole new world. It's just, yeah, this is better than what I've got, but not by streets. Just it's there. The colors are good. The flare resistance is good. All the details are super well, rendered. And yeah, you just like it's proper quality, but it's not a new world.
Okay.
Regarding bokeh, I would say as a user, that's probably the most, as once you start looking at your pictures, the thing you notice the most. Bokeh is how out of focus areas in a picture look. And I think those always look really, really pleasing with this lens. It has this buttery smoothness to the bokeh. It reminds me a little bit of the Sigma 150 macro, which I think
Mm.
because of that extra telephoto used to make these beautiful smooth bokeh backgrounds. And I was really impressed with the bokeh. This is just shooting a triple fin, sitting on the Porites coral here, and then you can see how the coral just blurs in the background. There's another triple fin you can see in the background blurred, and it's just beautifully smooth. And I
Yeah.
really like that in the pictures. This is just little goby sitting on the seabed. These shots, the Lembeh seabed, as you can see from the foreground, is all different sizes of rocks, all different colors of rocks. It's a really messy environment that these little fish live in, but it's just rendered so pleasing in the back of this shot because of how the lens. So it's a hard thing to explain unless you've shot lots of macro lenses on similar subjects. But it's the smoothness of these backgrounds that I think really set these subjects off. One of the worst subjects for backgrounds are blue ring octopus, because they live in really mixed up rubbly habitat, which is always really ugly, and they're often moving about. As you can see, this one is scrambling around, and I really like this pose. I think it's got a lot of energy in the pose of the blue ring. But just the nature of a shot like this is, of course I'd love to, maybe use a selective lighting technique or something to separate this from the background. But you don't have that time when you've got a blue ring suddenly on the move and you're trying to get a nice photo of it. And yeah, this was in front of a pretty ugly background, but I don't find that background too ugly in this shot because I think the
Yeah.
quality of the lens renders it in a pleasing way. So yeah, I was very impressed with the bokeh. And then obviously when you do have nice clean backgrounds, suddenly they just become even classier because of how well they're blurred. And I think it was shots like this that made me wish I had this lens in Canada last month,
I was about to
because
say the
all
same
those
thing.
colors, I was just going, oh, just imagine how it would blur
Yeah.
all the colors in Canada behind the subjects. So yeah, that's another reason to go back to Canada. But yeah, so yeah, when you've got those, so I'm really looking forward to shooting this lens more in coral reef environments. I think the longer focal length will be great there. The ability to kind of blur the color of a reef into kind of pleasing backgrounds, I think is going to be really strong. And I'm really pleased with that. And yeah, and I just found the bokeh of the lens very inspiring. And I was always looking for ways to bring the bokeh into my shots and create interesting images and different images from them. This is with a ghost pipefish surrounded by baitfish, and the baitfish are creating this really interesting bokeh in the image that I really liked.
Can I ask if you're able to check what aperture was like the blue ring and this one shot at?
This are probably between 4 and 2.8. I can't. I
Okay,
have to
so
look it
pretty
up.
wide open.
They're not on
Yeah.
my website. Yeah, but yeah, and then the blue ring maybe not quite as much as that. Maybe 5.6, but something
Okay.
like that.
Well,
Yeah,
like you said,
maybe a little bit more on the maybe even 5.6. I
those,
would say the ring is a
yeah,
guess.
those out of focus areas are often pretty unappealing, even with longer macro lenses. So the fact that it's blurring it so nicely, that alone is almost a selling point for me.
Yeah,
Just because I like doing a lot of that open aperture stuff here, but it's really hard to still find subjects that aren't up against something ugly.
Mm. Yeah, and I would say that, yeah, that does mark this lens out. But it's a strange thing to say. It's like, it's a macro lens. It's not about
Yeah,
how sharp it makes things. It's about how it does the
yeah,
blurry bits. I'm going
yeah,
to move on now and talk about using it with the teleconverter.
yeah.
And this is where it probably impressed me the most. I've used teleconverters before on macro lenses, particularly on the Nikon 100mm when I was shooting SLRs, and I'd use both the 1.4 and the 2x teleconverters on that, and they always impacted how quickly the lens focused. You know, you had quite a big trade-off. Putting the teleconverter on this lens, it blew me away with how well it performs. The Both in terms of the focusing and the sharpness of the details. It is great, and it's basically two lenses for the price of one, and plus a teleconverter, which in
Did
my
you?
case with the 1.4 I already own.
Okay, I was going to ask if you had both of them or if you only used the 1.4.
No, and when I ordered the lens, I was like, I'm only going to ever use the 1.4. You know, one teleconverter is enough. But I was so impressed with how the lens shot with the 1.4 that I'm going to order a 2x, because it was so good with the 1.4. It's like, I've just got to have both options. They're
Yeah,
relatively small additions for baggage allowance as a traveling photographer, and it gives you real flexibility. So yeah, I'll order a 2x when I get the lens. And yeah, it was just great. You know, all the subjects, you can sit a little bit further off things. That more compressed telephoto look allows you to use out of focus foregrounds. The autofocus, even on, moving subjects, and enemy fish are a great test for autofocus because they swim about,
yeah,
and they're easy to shoot. And I remember shooting this guy with a teleconverter, and I just like shot after shot after shot. Really, not every shot bang on with the autofocus, but none of them, like, I'm not missing shots by miles. It's
yeah.
just, I was really impressed. And the image quality, this guy was just near the enemy actually. The image quality is just fantastic with the image quality, with it so sharp. I did a cropping on the eye on this, but this is with the teleconverter on, and the image quality is just there.
Yeah, beautiful.
So yeah, more impressed using the lens with the teleconverter. In Lembeh, shooting 150mm macro lens is less useful than shooting 100mm. So I didn't use the teleconverter that much on this trip. But whenever I did, I was really impressed with it, because such a tight lens limits you to relatively small subjects in relatively low visibility diving. But it allows you to sit off subjects a little bit more, keeps the subjects maybe a little bit more relaxed, and allows you to get that more telephoto look, separating subjects from the background. Small, timid fish don't run off and hide. They just sit there and you can zap them. And the pajama cardinal fish, they're really cool fish. They're always quite shy. You go
Yeah,
towards them, they just turn away from you. You always end up with pictures of them side on or slightly turning away from the camera. You sit there with a 140mm macro lens on, and you can just fill the frame with them, and they're like super chilled out. You're like, haha, you don't even know I'm shooting you. So I really like that aspect of it. Obviously, going diving in the muck environment with a 140mm, 1.4x teleconverter on a 100mm lens is quite a tight lens. So it means if you run into bigger subjects, you have limitations. But because I had the MFO3 with me, which is the Nauticam lens that makes your macro lens wider again by quite a significant amount, and does so with excellent image quality, suddenly it was still a really flexible lens to dive with. So this is with the 1.4 teleconverter on the 100mm, but with the MFO3 on the front again, and I was able to shoot this coconut octopus as it was crawling over the sand. But with space around it. I didn't just have to stuff it in the frame. I could compose what I feel is a nice composition around the subject. And actually, this one came up and started touching the lens. But, this is almost like a wide-angle macro shot, and I've shot this with a 100mm macro lens and a teleconverter on, and I really enjoyed that flexibility of diving with it. And then at the other end, because the lens naturally focuses to 1.4 to 1, when you put the teleconverter on, that goes up even higher. And then this shot here is of a lollipop tunicate, which is those very small stalked colonial tunicates. And this is just a few of the individual, sea squirts on that tunicate. And this is uncropped macro lens shot with the lens, but not using like an SMC1 or SMC3 super macro close-up lens, just shot with a MFO1. And I was able to completely fill the frame with these guys using the teleconverter. So it's amazing flexibility to shoot something this tiny without much additional magnification on the front, or go out and shoot, bigger subjects like these guys, all on the same dive. And I think that was really impressed me about the lens, was that how flexible it was because of that little bit of extra magnification, and then combining that with some of the new underwater accessories we have, particularly the MFO 1 and 3.
So because you had access to all the different accessories, obviously Lembeh is typically known as a place that has slightly larger subjects, is the vast majority of what
Yeah.
you're shooting. How did I guess that made the 100 more appealing than it would have been otherwise compared to something like the 90 mils.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that, I use the lens on about a third of my dives. One of the reasons it wasn't 100% of the dives was it wasn't there when we first arrived. One of the reasons it wasn't 100% of the dives was I was sharing it with its owner, Nick, although he actually wasn't as keen to use it. And this probably comes to that, all the time. And this comes to that kind of third reason, is that actually I think that a 90mm is more of a suitable focal length than a 100mm in Lembeh. And I know people go, 90 and 100, it's almost the same. There is quite a difference in field of view between those two lenses.
Yeah.
The 90mm just seems to suit those subjects. It's just that little bit wider. It allows you to fill the frame, obviously, very easily with small subjects, but to shoot slightly larger subjects without having to back off too far. And so, yeah, we both enjoyed continually using the 90mm through the trip. And we had the 100mm in, most of the dives, but there were times where we just both wanted to use our 90mm. And so it wasn't in on every dive. If we had been diving in a coral reef environment, I would happily have left my 90mm at home. And just, you only need one macro lens in that situation, particularly if you have MFO3 along with you. So, yeah, and, for future trips in other destinations, I can see it just being the 100 for everything. But in this environment, I really appreciate the 90mm, and I also shot the Sony 50 as well. So, despite that flexibility. But yeah, you can still deal with the bigger subjects with it, especially with the addition of the MFO3. I enjoyed that focal length for blackwater photography. It was good on focus, good on image quality, and I enjoyed shooting a variety of subjects. You could make some of the smaller subjects fill the frame a little bit more because of that slightly longer lens. And you could pull down I use the flip on the blackwater dives. You could pull down the MFO3 and deal with some of the bigger subjects as well. So yeah, it was this guy's eating a pufferfish. That's what's in his mouth. He's not eating an egg. It was an inflated pufferfish that wasn't obviously very happy about being caught, so was trying to resist being eaten.
Speaking of the accessory lenses, because you've touched on the MFO1 and MFO3 a lot. I know you took the MWL to Lembeh as well. And obviously, it's a question that everybody's going to ask, is how this lens fares with those three optics in particular. Obviously, you've shown us some pictures that kind of make that clear, but if you wanted to talk a bit more about
and the reason I use the Nauticam ones is not any brand loyalty to Nauticam. It's because I believe they're the best ones. And I think if you're buying this lens, then you shouldn't be necessarily looking for some of the cheaper ones out there. But I have to say there's a lot of decent ones out there, but that's why I use the Nauticam ones, which is why those I wasn't interested in testing every last close-up lens with it. I just tested the ones I own and prefer to use myself. I use the MFO1 on it most of the time. In Lembeh, whether I'm shooting the 90mm or I'm shooting the 100mm, the MFO1 these days is always on my lens, always on my camera. I shoot very little shots there with a bare macro port. And then I change from the MFO1 to the other options when I need them. If I want more magnification, I put the SMC3 on. If I want the wider view, I put the MFO3 on. But most of the time it's MFO1, and it just deals with so many of the subjects really nicely. It gives you that flexibility to work the subjects, and you can produce, pleasing images. You can fill the frame with small subjects. And that close focus ability allows you to wrap the lighting around the subjects and create pleasing pictures like this, where you're perhaps lighting things in different and more unusual ways. And I like that about the MFO1, and it gives great image quality corner to corner in the frame as well. And so all those things are really pleasing. The MFO3 is better for those bigger subjects that are friendly. So this is a seahorse shot with the MFO3. You can get nice and close to it, not shoot through much water, get really nice colors, or again, use the lighting. This is shot with just single strobe, slightly from the back, bringing out the textures on this thorny seahorse. Um, or where you want to show an animal in its environment, again, shot with 100mm, but with an MFO3, this Halimeda ghost pipefish, I can show it in and amongst the Halimeda. With the straight 100mm and the MFO1, I could have done this guy filling the whole frame. But actually, for me, the story of this guy is how he blends in with his environment, and I want to show the environment in the shot. And there's actually, at the beginning, there was a video of me shooting this shot, which is why I put that bit of video clip in. And this was a pufferfish that had got attacked by something under the sand, either a bobbit worm or a snake eel. And it had inflated, and it was being slowly pulled down into the sand like some nightmarish scene. So yeah, photograph. This is MFO3. You can see the video if you watch the beginning of the video again, you'll see that. And then I was going to say sorry, and then on to the MWL. Yeah.
I was going to say I foolishly robbed mantis shrimp here one time of its pufferfish meal because I just saw the pufferfish inflated on the bottom, and I was like, "Oh, that's weird." So I poked it, and it must have loosened it up just enough that it managed to get away. And the mantis shrimp looked at me all forlornly, and the pufferfish decided I was his best friend and followed me around for a while, just huddled right next to me. So I felt like I did, while doing a bad deed, I had done a good deed. And, another meal.
Yeah. We didn't rescue the pufferfish. It was, it's nature playing out. So
yeah.
It was really horrible for the pufferfish, but he was. But anyway, I shot the lens also with the EMWL. I use the focusing unit 3, so that's the same focusing unit I use on the 90mm. And Nauticam did say to me that the positioning, the focusing unit 3 works perfectly, and it's the one they recommend for the Sony 100, but only if you're using their port. If the port distance isn't quite right, you might get cut off with it. So just, if you are thinking of adapting a different flat port, make sure your positioning is well for the MWL, which is the wide angled macro. And then this is a warty frogfish with some bait fish behind, a humpback scorpionfish, so typical EMWL subjects. I thought the image quality was really nice with it. The autofocus worked really well with the MWL. Not really much to report. It just worked. It's good with the MWL. And what's nice about this is it means that in future trips I'm taking the MWL, I know that I can trust the Sony 100. So if I go to the Red Sea, it's just going to be the 100mm. If I go to Cayman, I'm just going to take the 100mm for my macro. I'm not going to bother with the other lenses. And I know I can use it with the MWL.
Maybe you wouldn't be able to without shooting them next to each other, but did you notice that there's a slight reduction in the field of view shooting the same focusing unit?
I didn't, and I was expecting, because I was saying just a few slides ago that there is quite a big difference between a 90mm and a 100mm. And I didn't notice it that much with the EMWL. And I don't know whether this is to do with the positioning of the EMWL relative to the port, or quite what it was, but I didn't notice that big a difference. These are still super wide shots. So there must be a difference, but I didn't feel a big difference. And I think it's the difference between maybe 160 down to 150 degrees or something like that. So and particularly after doing a lot of macro, it's quite hard to maybe spot that difference. When I in Cayman, I may well try and do a pull shot to see how the two compare. In that, see if you can see a difference next time I have the chance to shoot the lens, assuming I get my lens by then. Right, we should wrap this up. I
guess the last question is, and we can end on this, is should you buy one?
I think the answer is quite individual in that there's a lot of gear out there. You go, this is the one to have. I think the challenge with this one is that the gains over the existing macro lenses are relatively small, although they're multifaceted. It's lots of small gains rather than any one big gain. But the purchase price is quite high because for a lot of users, it's going to be a new lens, which is not a cheap lens, and either a new port or a new port extension. Neither of those are particularly cheap either. So it's quite a big asking price to give you a lens that kind of does what you could already do, but with some small advantages. I would fully understand anyone wanting to buy this lens. It's the best macro lens out there. It's a really quality product and it's a pleasure to shoot. And if if those reasons are enough for you, I would thoroughly recommend the lens to anyone. Whether they should buy it or not becomes a little bit of a personal decision. If they
Yeah.
currently don't own any macro lenses, of course, this is the one to go for. But and if you're seriously wanting to use the best, then you're not going to be disappointed with this lens. But if you've spent a lot of money to add this to your arsenal of lenses, and you've already got a working 90mm that you're really happy with in terms of image quality, you might have a little bit of I was expecting more for all that money with this lens. And so I just put that out there. I'd thoroughly support anyone and recommend the lens to anyone, but you have to answer that financial question yourself.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. I enjoy this. I might be convinced, but I don't know if I'll get one. Anyway, I hope everybody enjoyed that. I'm sure a lot of people maybe have a dilemma like me as to whether or not to get one now. So thank you all for watching. Any comments, questions, concerns, please leave them down below, and we will see you guys next time.